Yeah, if you've applied, some of these application components look pretty similar to you. And this is the place where, you look at a grant and you're like, oh my gosh, what are all these words? What are they saying? Basically, it's the same thing every time. And it's pretty simple if we think about it this way. The first thing they're going to ask is, what's the problem? So they call it a problem statement. We've discussed that a little bit earlier today when you all created a list of some of the challenges in your community. They want to know what your approach is. If you go back to the logic model, that's part of what we were talking about in activities. They're going to want to know, how are you measuring this? How do you know it's working, if it's successful? The logic model is a tool you can use to do that as well. They want to know the capacity of your organization or your community to do the work. They're going to check on your budget, and there's going to be some attachments that they've got. So I have up in front of you a pretty simple scoring rubric. So I know some folks raised their hand about applying for grants before. I wonder how many folks, when you've applied for grants, they've said, okay, we'll give you certain points for certain things. Are there folks who have experience with that? I'm seeing a head shake. So I'll go through it a little bit both ways. So what you're seeing is a scoring matrix, but let me talk about if it's not there. So if a scoring matrix is not there because it's a foundation and they're not putting points behind what they're doing, what you'll often want to do is look through what they say about things. How much space do they give you for different things? Did they give you 500 characters to talk about your community and only 10 characters to talk about something else? Is there a way that you can cover everything in those tiny spaces that they'll put on your computer screen? Those are some clues that they're giving you when they do that. This scoring matrix itself is giving you some clues about what this particular funder is interested in. It's a little like a grade, right? I don't know, back when I was in school, in particular in middle school and high school, my teacher would say a test is worth 100 points. And so as I go along, every time I saw an X, I knew I was losing certain points. So I tried not to get the X's and lose certain points. It's the same thing here. So in this case, what I've given you an example is from the Centers for Disease Control. It's a REACH grant. And this is really small subset of it, but I just wanted to show you a couple things about it. These things that are in gray, these big bolded gray areas, are the main part of the narrative. They're actually your headings. So all you would have to do is put approach, evaluation, organizational capacity, budget, and you're on your way to writing that grant. Simple, right? And then you have to go back and say, well, where are they giving you your most points? And so what do you notice? When I look at this, I see a couple things. I'm always intrigued if you go all the way to the bottom, if you look at the budget, there's 5 points here. Often federal grants don't even give any points for the budget. It's kind of a tricky thing. You have to have your budget correct. It has to tell people what they're doing, but they might not demonstrate many points for that. Basically what they're doing when they look at the budget is to see if you understand how much things cost. So then when I look back at this, I see that they're giving me most of my points in my approach. And so the approach, I went ahead and broke down, because they did, in a couple of different categories. They're giving me 45 points for this whole section. They won't probably tell me how many pages to write it in, although they might have said that the grant itself is 10 pages. So I need to figure out what to do within that. They'll talk about, within this case, they broke it down in 2 different ways: the narrative, so the words that you're using. And in this case, they want to see a work plan. For folks who aren't familiar with the work plan, it's basically, here's the activity I'm going to do, here's the person who's going to do it, and here's my due date. 3 columns. You just keep filling it out as you go. These folks wanted to go more specific, and you can see how they're breaking it down where they're giving you points. 5 points for the community, discussing the communities, 5 points for using statistics to back it up, and 15 points to talk about your overarching strategy. I know that was quick and we're not going to practice this ourselves, but were there any questions about a scoring rubric and why it's important to look at it? You can come off mute or you could go in the chat. All right, let's talk about timelines. You have a grant that comes in front of you and you're looking at timelines. So I only had 4 or 5 people raise their hands about writing a grant, but I'm guessing from the original poll that we had, it looked like about at least half of the people talked about having written grants before, feeling confident that they could get the grants. So
Lisa,
I wanted to, yes.
I'm sorry. I wanted to jump in and say that there is a comment in the chat that says, yep, it's also great to use to check you have answered what they are looking for.
Yeah, are you talking about the scoring rubric? Yeah, that's really important. So the scoring rubric lets you go back and create your own checklist. So I'm going to go back to that. It lets you make sure that you've answered each of these. In fact, anytime I write a grant, I leave their entire scoring rubric up in front of me until my last draft. And then I'll strike out when I answer a particular thing. So that is one way to use that as a tool. Thank you for pointing that out for me. So this is another tool that you can use. It's a timeline. It's a super simple timeline, I have to say. It depends on how you write the grants. I wonder if folks could put in the chat for me for folks who write the grants. Are you usually the only one writing the grant? Who's helping with the grants in your organization? Is it you and other people? And you can come off mute and let me know. How many folks on here are the only ones writing the grant? You can raise your hand, put it in the chat. Marcella's busy. She is writing her grants. It's a group effort. With me, it can be anything. Often people hire me to help them lead teams of folks who are writing grants. Sometimes they'll ask me to be the lead author and write the grant themselves. The first thing I try to do is understand what's the time frame I got and who am I working with? Why do I need a timeline anyway? So I'll look at this and decide, okay, what you'll notice on this left-hand side is the what. So these are the sections we talked about that come in a grant. I'll break them up this way because sometimes, like one of our participants said, more people than one is writing the grant. So I might be writing the problem statement and somebody else in an organization might be writing the agency capacity. So I'll break it down across these different things and put what. So as you can guess, the who is whoever's writing it. So for folks who raised their hand and said, hey, I'm the lead grant writer, I write it all, your name goes in all here. And you know, it doesn't really matter that much. It's pretty simple for you about the who. One of the things that I want to point out about evaluation, one of the things you'll have to decide early on, are you using an internal or external evaluator? The other thing I wanted to point out as we go across here is you'll notice that I've got 3 drafts here. Different people call them different things, but I call my draft 1 spaghetti on the wall. So for folks who are on here, spaghetti on the wall means, hey, I just want to see what I've got working. Ideally, if I'm writing a grant, I'm going to pull from something that's already written. There's places that we can pull from. We can pull from old grants that we've already written. We can pull from evaluation reports. We can pull from those communication strategies. So people talked about earlier having communication strategies. So what language do you already have that can go in there? And I'm all about that. I create my narrative headings. I go in and throw any piece of language I have about these different entities, problem statement, approach, evaluation, capacity, and I start throwing them in the narrative. That's my spaghetti on the wall. The due dates, you all have to decide for yourself, and it's partially going to be dependent upon how much time you have. I say your spaghetti on the wall comes as soon as you can do it, but that would be up to how you all need to set your time frame. The other thing that I would point out as we go down here is I'm always looking for the things that I can do right away. So in this case, one of the things I can do right away is look at the attachments. What attachments do I need to put in here? Often it's the IRS determination letter, the audit, the board list, etc. I go ahead and put those aside and work on other things. So the only other thing I'll talk about in here is letters of support. How many folks are familiar with letters of support? I'm seeing people nod their heads. Basically, it's getting other folks who would partner with you to say, hey, we support this application. It could be a letter of support saying we think it would do great in our community. Another version is a letter of commitment. So often whenever I have a chance, once I know exactly what I'm going to be doing, I try to write a template that I can give out to partners. Often your application will ask for letters of support, and many times it's as many as you can get is what you're trying to do. So I want to take us back to the logic model for a second. This is another way that you can use the logic model. I just want to keep us in the same genre and let us look at how we can use tools. This goes right back to writing the proposal, right? And so if you think about it, this is really just the problem statement. And here you're talking about your capacity. The next thing they're going to want to know is who are you focusing it on? Then what's your approach? How are you going to do it? And these are the things about how you evaluate it. So it's a pretty flexible tool that you can use more than one time. Are there any questions about this before I move on to the next slide? I'm going to talk about making your case. So problem statement, remember we talked about framing it as an opportunity. Really the thing you want to make sure that you do is you focus on the main problem or main challenge. In this case, we could call it the main opportunity. So make sure that you stay within that main thing that you want to talk about. Is it workforce development? Great. So what are you doing about workforce development? How are you addressing that? And why are you the best fit? Then the next thing you want to do is make sure that your project links with the funder's objectives. We talked about that a little earlier, but this is really a specific point where you want to go back and you're checking three things, right? Is this still within our mission? Is this addressing what they want to do? And then is our project objectives match? You know, a super simple trick with that is you can often take their objectives, rewrite them just a little bit and put them in your grant and see if it's still a fit. If it's not, then it's probably not funding that you want to go for. If it is, that's great. So the other thing you want to do is emphasize the urgency. You're always wanting to answer the question as you move forward, what happens if we don't do this now? So that the reviewer can immediately see how important it is to fund this project that you're putting out there. You want to use statistics and stories, which can be complicated sometimes in a grant, but it's also something that you want to do in sustainability. When you do your communication, make sure people can see the people behind what you're doing. So I was going to show you some examples. I know that we're getting closer to time. We have another half an hour together. I'm going to show you a couple of examples, and then we're going to spend a little bit of time with you all creating your own pitch so that you break out into small groups. So one of the things I put on here are a couple of examples where you can get information that might help you talk to folks that you're trying to get funding from to tell them why it's important to fund you. How many folks have heard of the county health rankings? For folks who I can see your screen, you can raise your hand again. For other folks, you can put it in the chat. Oh, I see a hand going up. Yay. So one of the things that you want to make, I see another hand going up. So I'm going to actually stop this share. I talk out loud about what I'm doing mostly so I can try to get it right myself. So I'm going to stop this share and I'm going to bring up something else. I'm going to try to bring up something else. Hold on a sec. So I can spend hours trying to look for statistics to try to prove a point to somebody about what I'm doing. I mean, literally hours, days. Every time I make a bid on a grant and I try to figure out what I'm trying to say, I'm like, oh my gosh, how do I say this? How do I prove my point? And then I go look just to see what's going on in Cook County, and you will have this amazing resource all in one place. And I have to say I'm a little jealous. And so the resource, and I know you have more than one, we only have time to go over one, but the Cook County Health Atlas is an amazing resource for you all. If you type in here anything you want to know, it's going to pop up. Again, I'm a little jealous. So we talked about food security. So I just typed in food here to see what's going to pop up. And there's three things that popped up immediately. This is a place if you like playing with maps or numbers or just you're curious, because that's the only thing that keeps me going with statistics. I'm curious. I'm not a statistician. So I'm like, okay, let's see what's going on. Low food access. It's popping it up. So the nice thing about this, I love this, it's killing me how much I like it, and sounding like a geek a little bit. So what this does is it lets you see what's happening with food access. If it's red, it's worse. If it's purple, it's better. If there's certain communities you work in, you can click on those and it'll tell you more information about it. It'll break it down by race and ethnicity, age, federal poverty level. There are all kinds of things that you can do on this site. And lest I spend the next 30 minutes going through it with you, I just want to, I'm going to stop right there and just let you know it's a resource that you can go to. I'll go back to the slide deck and it's there. It's also in the Dropbox as something you can do. So you can play around with this all you want and find information. So here, if I highlight over this, it tells me within this neighborhood that 66.98% of the residents have low food access. If I want to understand what that is, I can click on that and it tells me what that is. These are the perfect ways to explain your community to folks when you're asking them and for money for programs that you want to do, when you're trying to check if you're in the right place for the money that you want to do, and you want to prove urgency for something. The other thing you can use this for is make sure that you compare it against something. So if you want to argue that your community is the most important one, if this is the community, Barrington Hills, and you want to argue that it needs more assistance with food access, then you can compare it against other communities that have higher food access. So it will show the reviewers the difference. I'm not an expert on this particular site, and since we don't have much time, I'm not going to go through any more of it. I'm going to close it down without asking questions. And I'm going to stop share and get my... The only question I would ask you as I'm getting it up, why do you think it's important to show people statistics about your community? You can put it in the chat or you can come off mute. Oh, look, thanks, Janice. What do you think
I need?
Oh, go ahead. I interrupted you. Can you say it again?
Sorry, I didn't raise my hand. Justify need?
Justify need. Can you say more about that when you say justify need?
So if we're spelling out that we have a food insecurity for low income after school programs, for example, and why that looks like that, we can also talk about the nourishment and other details that support the cause of what we're trying to do. That's
perfect, Amy. That's perfect. The other thing about those statistics is you can also look at your community assets. Remember, we're framing your community both as the challenges, but the opportunity that presents. So as you dig through some of those numbers, you can look at them to say, okay, we have food insecurity as an issue here. Here's another thing we have, though. We have all this capital, which means we have all these people or organizations or things that are ready to step in. You frame your organization as that solution. You frame the people you're working with as that solution. And so those are some of the ways you do it. You can do it through the stories too.